Why you didn't really choose this life. A Buddhist wisdom. Why your mind feels out of control. Many people today have heard the idea that you chose this life. But what does that really mean? In Buddhism, this idea isn't about blame. It's not saying you are responsible for your suffering in some moral or mystical way. It also doesn't mean you made a decision before birth to sign up for the life you're living now. That would still imply a permanent you somewhere, and that's not what Buddhism teaches. From both a Buddhist and psychological view, the deeper truth is this: much of your life is shaped by patterns that were formed without your full awareness. These patterns arise from deep layers of the mind, and they influence your thoughts, your emotional reactions, your relationships, and even your opportunities, long before you consciously recognize what's happening. Understanding this unseen process is the first step toward real freedom. If you've ever had the feeling, "Why did I just say that?" or "Why do I always react this way?" you're not alone. Most of us have lived moments where we surprised ourselves, repeating old mistakes we promised to avoid. This is not a personal flaw. It is part of being human. In psychology, Carl Jung explored this through the concept of the shadow. Parts of the psyche that we don't fully see, but which still shape our choices from the background. In Buddhist philosophy, this same process is described as the stream of consciousness, citta santati. It's not a permanent self that travels through time, but rather a continuous series of mental moments. Imagine watching a movie. Each frame appears briefly and disappears, yet together they create the illusion of a flowing story. In the same way, our mental stream moves forward, frame by frame, carrying with it our tendencies, our fears, and our habits. But this leads to a very deep question. If there's no solid me, then whose habits are these? Who is carrying these tendencies forward? Interestingly, the Scottish philosopher David Hume asked the same question. He turned his attention inward, searching for a self. But all he could find were shifting thoughts, sensations, and perceptions. No fixed center, no solid I, just a flow. And he realized what the Buddha had already taught centuries earlier. The idea of a permanent self is something we assume. It is not something we actually find. So then, how do these habits continue? Buddhism offers a beautiful image. Think of a wave traveling across the surface of the ocean. The water doesn't move far. It only rises and falls. But the shape of the wave, the pattern, can travel great distances. Our mental habits are like that wave. They move forward through time, passed from one moment to the next, even though there is no solid person holding them. The pattern continues, not because there is a fixed self, but because the conditions allow it to. This is how our life is shaped, not by a single choice in the past, but by countless tiny moments, flowing together, forming patterns that repeat themselves. And this pattern is not fate. It can be understood. And once it's understood, it can be transformed. Why habits shape your reality. When people hear the word karma, many immediately think of fate, cosmic payback, or some invisible force keeping moral score. But in Buddhist teaching, karma is not about reward or punishment. It is simply a natural law, the law of cause and effect, applied to the mind. Just as dropping a stone creates ripples in water, every thought and action sets something in motion. And over time, those motions become patterns. These patterns become your life. Imagine your mind as a field. Walk the same path across it day after day, and eventually the grass wears down, forming a trail. Meanwhile, paths you don't use become overgrown. This is how habits form. The more you repeat a way of thinking, reacting, or behaving, the easier it becomes to repeat again. Not because fate demands it, but because your mind, like the body, learns through repetition. Karma is the word Buddhism uses for this process of conditioning. It is not a judgment, it's a description. The Buddha was very precise about where this process begins. He said, "It is intention, monks, that I call karma." The key word is satana, intention. Karma doesn't begin when you act. It begins with the mental impulse, the push behind the action. That impulse is the seed. Two people might do the exact same thing, donate to charity, for example, but one acts out of compassion, while the other acts to be admired. Though the gesture looks identical, the internal quality, the karma, is different. And so, over time, the effects will differ too. This idea isn't limited to Buddhism. The Greek philosopher Aristotle offered a similar insight. He taught that we become what we practice. We become just by doing just acts, he said. In other words, character isn't a trait you're born with. It's something you sculpt, one decision at a time. Who you are today is not the result of a single choice, but of hundreds of small, repeated actions that have settled into the shape of your personality. But karma isn't just individual. Your personal stream of choices flows into much larger currents. You are not an isolated event. You are part of a family, a culture, a world. And the patterns you inherited were shaped by those who came before you, just as your choices will shape what comes after. A child born into a war zone or a broken system isn't suffering because of something they deserve. That child is receiving the impact of collective karma, a web of shared causes created by millions of people, often over generations. Their situation is real, but it is not a moral verdict. Understanding this helps dissolve both arrogance and guilt. It reminds us that life is not a personal scorecard. It is a living system of cause and effect, in which every intention, however small, leaves a trace. And when we truly see this, karma becomes not a burden, but a doorway. Because if your life is shaped by intention, then in this very moment, you can begin shaping it differently. Why we keep making the same mistakes. At this point, a natural question arises. If habits shape our lives, then why do so many of our habits lead us in the wrong direction? Why do we keep repeating choices that hurt ourselves and others? The answer lies in a deep misperception at the core of our experience. In Buddhist teaching, this is called avijja, often translated as ignorance. But it's not about intelligence. It's more like a built-in blind spot, a quiet distortion in the way we see reality. And because we see things wrongly, we act wrongly. Not because we're bad, but because we're confused. This confusion shows up in three major ways. First, we treat things that are constantly changing as if they will last forever. We cling to people, plans, identities, as though they are solid and unshakable. But life is fluid. Everything we hold on to eventually shifts or slips away. And when it does, we feel pain. Not because life has betrayed us, but because we misunderstood its nature. Second, we chase happiness in places that cannot offer true fulfillment. we search for satisfaction in success, approval, possessions, things that fade or fluctuate. The more we grasp, the more restless we become. It's not that joy is impossible. It's that we're looking in the wrong direction. And third, perhaps most deeply, we see ourselves and others as separate, fixed entities. We believe in a solid me who is being wronged by a solid you. This illusion of separation fuels judgment, blame, resentment, and fear. Imagine someone says something unkind. The immediate reaction is, they are a bad person. That's the habit. But if we pause and look more deeply, we might see something else. This was an expression of their own suffering. That one shift, from seeing a person as bad to seeing an action as conditioned, can end a conflict before it begins. This idea isn't unique to Buddhism. The philosopher Plato described something similar in his allegory of the cave. He imagined people chained in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, believing the shadows to be reality. They're not foolish. They're simply limited by what they can see. Avijja is like living in that cave, mistaking the flickers on the wall for the whole of life. And so we return to a question many people silently carry. If I created these patterns, why don't I remember doing it? The answer is simple but difficult. Because you weren't fully aware when it happened. The choice wasn't made clearly, with your full attention. It was more like falling asleep at the wheel. Not in a dramatic, reckless way, but in the quiet way habits sneak in over time. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be insecure, angry, avoidant, or fearful. But slowly, across many small moments of unconscious reaction, those tendencies took shape. And now, even if the memory is gone, the consequences remain. The pattern still plays out. But here's the good news. What was built in unconsciousness can be changed in awareness. And every time you see through the illusion, even for a second, you weaken its grip. That is the beginning of freedom. How mindfulness changes your reactions. This brings us to a very practical and pressing question. If our minds naturally fall into old patterns shaped by ignorance, are we just trapped in them forever? The Buddha's answer is clear. No, we are not trapped. In fact, liberation is possible precisely because these patterns are not permanent. The teachings of the Buddha are not about believing in something outside yourself. They are about learning to see clearly, to observe how your mind works, and to train it. In this way, Buddhism shares common ground with modern approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy. Both begin with a powerful idea that your life can change if you change the way you respond to your own thoughts and behaviors. The main tool for this change is mindfulness. But mindfulness here does not mean some mystical or exotic practice. It simply means being aware, to see what your mind is doing while it is doing it. Most of our suffering comes from reacting without noticing. A thought appears, and we follow it. A feeling arises, and we obey it. But when you train in mindfulness, you start to notice what's happening before the reaction takes over. You begin to interrupt the old momentum. It's in that interruption, that tiny pause, where your freedom lives. Suppose someone says something harsh, and anger immediately flares up. The old pattern would be to lash out in return. But now, with mindfulness, you catch it. You feel the heat in your chest. You notice the clenching in your jaw. You don't act yet. You simply stay with the feeling. In that space, even if it's just one breath long, a new response becomes possible. Maybe you say nothing. Maybe you ask a question instead. Whatever it is, it's no longer automatic. It's intentional. Here's a small but powerful practice. When a strong emotion arises, like irritation, fear, or anxiety, try these 3 steps. First, stop, even just for a second. Second, breathe. Really feel the breath as it moves in and out. Third, ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to make me do, and do I have to obey it? This is how real transformation begins, not by fighting your emotions, but by learning to sit with them, observe them, and choose your response. You're no longer being swept away. You're beginning to steer the course. This idea is not unique to Buddhism. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." You can't always control what life gives you. Some causes were planted long ago. But you always have the power to choose how you respond right now. That is where your true power lies. And that is where the possibility of freedom begins. Not somewhere far away, but in the exact moment you choose to see clearly and respond with awareness. Where is your real choice? Now that we've seen how the mind operates, how it forms habits, reacts on impulse, and clings to illusions, we can finally return to the big question. Did you really choose this life? In one sense, no. You did not sit down before birth and select your family, your body, or your circumstances. These conditions arose out of causes far beyond your conscious reach. According to the Buddha, they are shaped by karma, the accumulated intentions and actions from this life and previous ones. But karma doesn't mean fate. It doesn't mean you're stuck. It simply explains how the past created the conditions you now face. So where is your choice? It's not in a single decision you once made. It's in the many small decisions made over time. Decisions so subtle and repeated so often that they began to shape your character, your preferences, your reactions. The life you are living now is the result of these repeated patterns, many of them unconscious. But this is precisely what makes the present moment powerful. It's where you can stop the repetition. Instead of asking, "Why did I choose this life?" it's more accurate to ask, "How am I continuing to choose this life right now?" Because while the past has momentum, the present has freedom. The Buddha didn't teach us to dig endlessly into the past for answers. He pointed us toward the present moment, the only place where true transformation can happen. You did not choose your starting point, but you are absolutely choosing your direction now. That choice happens every time you meet a moment with awareness rather than habit. Every time you pause instead of react. Every time you respond with clarity instead of fear. This is what it means to become the cause of your own future, rather than just the result of your past. You move from living out patterns to creating new possibilities. When someone asked the Buddha what he had become through his practice, he didn't claim any supernatural title. He simply said, "I am awake." That awakening wasn't a mystical event. It was a clear, direct realization that the mind could be trained, and that awareness was the doorway to real freedom. That same doorway is open to you now. The choice to walk through it isn't about changing your past. It's about seeing clearly what you are doing now, and whether it's leading towards suffering or liberation. This is where your real power lies. Not in controlling the world, not in rewriting your story, but in the quiet, steady decision to wake up, right here, right now.